The smoke alarms didn't work. We tried to save her, they told firefighters. But the 911 call captured my screams. They nailed my windows shut. I can't get out. They want me dead. When investigators saw the fresh hammer marks. You know, there are some moments in life that just shatter everything you thought you knew. For me, that moment came 3 years ago, when I woke up to my childhood home engulfed in flames, and the horrifying truth hit me. Every single window in my bedroom had been nailed shut. It was a desperate 911 call, choked with smoke and terror, that saved my life, and finally exposed the monstrous secret my parents had been hiding all along. ***, before I dive into the sheer madness of it all, maybe my story can make someone out there feel a little less alone. From the outside, we were the quintessential American dream. My mother, Susan, always immaculate, volunteering at church, hosting perfect neighborhood parties. My father, Harold, a respected accountant, a little league coach, always a friendly wave. Our house in suburban Minnesota was a showpiece, with a garden that actually won awards. I was their only child, and people constantly told me how incredibly lucky I was to have such wonderful parents. But behind that glossy white front door, with its carefully chosen seasonal wreaths, life operated under a different, chilling set of rules. I was 7 when I first realized something was deeply, terribly off. I'd invited a friend over, and before she even arrived, my mother sat me down and recited the rooms we could enter, the toys we could share, the topics that were appropriate. When my friend innocently asked to see my bedroom, my mother stepped in, a tight smile on her face, saying some areas were private. By age 10, I understood everything was controlled. My clothes were chosen for me. My hair cut at 6-week intervals. My lunches packed with identical contents. Friends were vetted, playdates monitored. "We just want to protect you, Amber," my mother would coo, her voice soft but her eyes like steel. "The world is full of dangerous people. You are precious to us." I remember the exact moment I found my bedroom window locked. It was a beautiful spring day, and I was 10. I just wanted to feel the breeze, but the window wouldn't budge. My father explained they'd installed special safety locks to keep bad people out and our curious little girl safe inside. At the time, it made sense. I believed them. I believed everything they did was out of love, for my protection. Even when things felt strange or restrictive, I convinced myself it was normal. What else did I have to compare it to? In school, I excelled. They demanded perfect grades, and I delivered. Teachers praised my intelligence, my focus. What they couldn't see was the quiet panic that would grip me over anything less than an A, knowing the silent disappointment waiting at home. Extracurriculars were forbidden, unnecessary distractions, dangerous, questionable influences, interfering with sacred family dinner. My father rarely contradicted my mother. Sometimes, I'd catch him watching me with sad, tired eyes, but when I asked what was wrong, he'd just force a smile and say, "Nothing, sweetie. Just thinking how fast you're growing up." When I was 13, I finally got to visit a classmate's house for a school project. My mother only allowed it because Sarah's parents were doctors with impeccable reputations. At Sarah's house, I watched, completely amazed, as she just opened the fridge for snacks without asking permission. She played music in her room with the door closed. She casually mentioned soccer practice, and her mom just nodded, "Have fun." On the ride home, sitting silently in the backseat, a new, unsettling understanding began to form. My family wasn't like others. This level of control wasn't normal protection. But I pushed the thought away, telling myself they just loved me more, cared more deeply. That night, I tried to open my bedroom window again. This time, it wasn't just locked, it was sealed. I could see some kind of adhesive around the edges. When I pressed my face against the glass, looking down at our perfectly manicured lawn, a strange sensation twisted in my stomach. Not just the trapped feeling I'd grown used to, but something deeper. Something like dread. "Mom," I asked at breakfast the next morning, trying to keep my voice light. "Why is my window sealed shut?" She didn't look up from arranging my fruit into a perfect, geometric pattern. "We had a problem with drafts. The heating bill was outrageous last winter." It was June. We hadn't used the heating in months. But I nodded, ate my perfectly arranged breakfast, and pretended to accept it. That was the first time I consciously recognized my mother was lying to me. It would not be the last. As I approached my teenage years, the lies multiplied, and so did the restrictions. Each one presented as a loving gesture, each one tightening the invisible cage around me. By 15, my desire for independence was violently crashing against their escalating control. While other teenagers negotiated curfews, I was fighting for the basic right to walk to the mailbox alone. My mother installed a tracking app on my phone. If I deviated even slightly from approved routes, my phone would ring. "Where are you?" she'd demand, no greeting. "The app shows you're 2 blocks from your usual path." After the third violation, once for petting a dog, once for ducking into a store during a sudden rain shower, my father started driving me to and from school every single day, eliminating even those tiny moments of autonomy. At 16, I discovered cameras. Not obvious ones, but tiny lenses hidden in smoke detectors, picture frames, even my desk lamp. My hands shook as I examined the first one, my mind racing through all the private moments they had observed without my knowledge. When I confronted them at dinner that night, my mother's reaction was chilling. "You wouldn't need to be monitored if we could trust you," she said calmly, continuing to cut her chicken into precise pieces. "Your behavior has been concerning lately. Your father and I have discussed having you evaluated." "Evaluated for what?" I shot back, my voice rising despite my efforts. "For wanting privacy? For being a normal teenager?" My father cleared his throat. "Your mother thinks you might be developing some psychological issues, Amber. The secret of behavior, the mood swings. We're worried about you." It was the first time they'd openly suggested there was something wrong with me, but it became their favorite tactic. Any resistance was framed as mental instability. Any request for freedom was a troubling sign. My mother started telling extended family and neighbors that I was struggling emotionally, implying I had behavioral problems. She even scheduled doctor's appointments, describing symptoms I never experienced, speaking about me as if I weren't sitting right there. "She has these episodes," she'd say, voice lowered with practiced concern. "Irrational outbursts, paranoid thoughts. We're at our wits' end." I'd try to defend myself, to explain I was fine, just frustrated. But my protests only reinforced their narrative that I was troubled and in denial. Around this time, my bedroom window security intensified. Simple locks were replaced with elaborate mechanisms that needed keys they kept. Metal bars were installed, disguised as decorative elements but functioning like a prison. The curtains were replaced with heavy, light-blocking versions, which my mother claimed would help me sleep better. It was Jessica, my lab partner in chemistry, who truly saw it. We'd become friends despite my limited social interactions. She noticed the dark circles, my flinching at loud noises, my reluctance to talk about home. "Amber, are you okay?" she asked one day. "Like, really okay?" "Because sometimes you act like someone who's afraid all the time." The simple question broke something open inside me. In that empty classroom, smelling of chemicals and chalk, I told her everything: the control, the surveillance, the accusations, the locked windows. Jessica listened, her eyes widening. "That is not normal," she said finally. "That is not parents being protective. That is abuse." Hearing those words spoken aloud was terrifying, but also incredibly validating. Abuse happened in homes with shouting and violence, not perfectly maintained houses with church volunteering mothers and little league fathers. But as Jessica helped me research psychological abuse, I saw my family in every description. Jessica tried to help. She offered to tell her parents, to contact authorities. But my mother, discovering our deepening friendship, intervened with stunning efficiency. She contacted the school counselor, painted Jessica as a bad influence, and spoke with Jessica's parents, portraying me as troubled. Within weeks, Jessica was no longer my lab partner, and her parents had forbidden her from seeing me. I was 17 when I made my first escape attempt. I'd secretly saved money from my meager allowance, researching bus routes and youth shelters. One night, I packed a small bag and waited until the house was silent. I climbed out my bedroom window, having spent weeks carefully loosening the newest security measures. I made it 3 miles before my father's car pulled alongside me. He didn't speak as I got in, my small bag clutched to my chest. At home, my mother was on the phone with the police, tearfully reporting that her mentally disturbed daughter had run away during an episode. "She's not well," I heard her saying. "We've been trying to get her proper help. We're so worried she might hurt herself." The next day, my bedroom door had a new lock on the outside. My window was completely sealed with a material I couldn't identify. And my parents started giving me pills, morning and evening, insisting they were prescribed by a doctor I'd never met. For your anxiety, sweetheart, my mother would say, watching to ensure I swallowed them. To help keep those troubling thoughts under control. The medication left me groggy, disoriented. My once excellent school performance suffered. Teachers looked at me with concern, but accepted my mother's explanation of medication adjustment. By my senior year, the narrative of my instability was firmly established. I was the troubled girl with the saintly parents who sacrificed everything for their challenged child. People looked at me with pity or discomfort. No one questioned why I was never seen without parental supervision, why I no longer participated in class, why I seemed to disappear further into myself. The pills, the isolation, the surveillance, the locked doors and windows, they all served the same purpose, to convince me I needed their protection from the world and from myself, to break down any sense that I could exist independently. But deep inside, a small flame of resistance continued to burn. I began secretly spitting out the pills. I read books on psychological abuse, hidden inside approved school texts. I documented everything in a journal, concealed inside a hollowed-out dictionary, a hiding place inspired by a novel. I graduated high school in a fog, with no friends, no plans for college. My parents announced a gap year for my health, which really meant another year under their total control. As my classmates prepared for independence, I prepared for more intensive confinement. I was 18, legally an adult, but with no practical means to exercise my freedom. The world outside our house had become an abstract concept. But that flame, that tiny ember of defiance, still refused to die. At 21, my life bore no resemblance to what most young adults experienced. While peers were finishing college, starting careers, or traveling, I existed within the suffocating confines of my parents' control. The only concession to my adulthood was permission to take online classes through a local community college, a program my mother selected and monitored closely. "See how we support your education, Amber," she'd say, checking my computer history daily. Most parents wouldn't invest so much in a child with your challenges. The challenges were entirely their creation, a narrative so thoroughly established that even I sometimes questioned my own perceptions. Was I unstable? Did I truly need their protection? The doubt was by design, a product of years of gaslighting and isolation. But during my online psychology class, I encountered information about emotional abuse that resonated deeply. I began to understand the tactics my parents employed: isolation, gaslighting, control, monitoring, medication. During lectures, I would mute my computer and silently cry, recognizing my life in the clinical descriptions of abuse victims. My professor, Dr. Matthews, noticed my exceptional work on assignments related to family dynamics. During a required video conference, she asked questions that hinted she sensed something beneath my careful responses. I was terrified of saying too much, knowing my mother often stood just outside my door. But Dr. Matthews seemed to understand. "Amber, there are resources available for young adults transitioning to independence," she said casually at the end of our call. "I'll email you some information. Some of my students find it very helpful." The email contained links about domestic abuse, cleverly hidden within scholarship opportunities. I understood immediately. She suspected my situation. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I began a secret plan. My online transcription job, approved by my parents because it could be monitored and didn't require leaving the house, paid me directly to a PayPal account. I diverted small amounts to a secret bank account, using information from Dr. Matthews' links. I researched domestic violence shelters, memorized phone numbers, unable to write them down for fear of discovery. In those months, I also formed my first real connection with a neighbor. Lauren Davis, a young nurse, moved in next door. She worked night shifts and would wave to me when I was allowed into the backyard for supervised fresh air. She noticed how my mother hovered, how my father always checked the perimeter before I was permitted outside. One day, Lauren approached our fence while my mother was distracted by a phone call. "Is everything okay with you?" she asked quietly. "I don't mean to intrude, but something seems off." Before I could respond, my mother was beside me, arm around my shoulders in what looked like an affectionate gesture, but felt like a restraint. "Amber has some special needs," my mother told Lauren with practiced sympathy. "We have to be very careful with her. Behavioral issues, you understand." Lauren nodded politely, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe my mother. That small moment of recognition gave me hope. Over the following weeks, I managed to slip Lauren notes through a loose board in the fence during my supervised outdoor time. Brief messages explaining my captivity, begging for help. Lauren responded, leaving tiny folded papers in the same gap. She believed me. She was willing to help. We developed a plan for her to contact authorities with my detailed accounts of abuse. But my parents discovered our communication. I never learned how surveillance footage, my mother's constant vigilance. One evening, my father entered my room holding one of Lauren's notes. "Who is trying to take you away from us, Amber?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "Who has been feeding your delusions?" That night, they took everything, my computer, my phone, even the books for my online classes. My father installed deadbolts on my bedroom door, this time not even pretending they were for anything other than confinement. And that's when I discovered them nailing my windows shut. I woke to the sound of hammering late at night. Creeping to my door, I peered through the crack. My father was methodically driving nails through the window frame in the hallway. When he finished, he applied some kind of sealant. "Harold, make sure they're secure," my mother whispered. "She's been planning something. I can feel it." "This feels extreme, Susan," my father replied, his voice hesitant for perhaps the first time I could remember. "She is our daughter." "She is sick," my mother hissed. "She would run away and end up dead in a ditch somewhere. Everything we do is to protect her from herself. Do you want her blood on your hands?" The next morning, I confronted them at breakfast, abandoning the compliant persona I'd maintained as protective camouflage. "I saw you nailing the windows shut," I said, my voice shaking. "Why are you doing this?" My mother's face showed no surprise, only calm, chilling resolution. "To protect you from yourself, Amber. Your recent behavior shows you're having another episode." "What happens if there's a fire?" I asked, my voice thin. "How would I get out?" "We would save you," my father said, not meeting my eyes. "We always take care of you." "You are imprisoning me," I declared. My mother's smile was icy. "We are saving you. Someday you will understand." After that confrontation, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Food was strictly controlled, served in small, irregular portions. Bathroom visits were supervised, the door forced to remain partially open. The medication increased, new pills with stronger effects that left me disoriented and nauseated. I heard my mother on the phone discussing residential treatment facilities. I understood with horrifying clarity that they were planning to institutionalize me, to transfer their home prison to a more official one where their narrative of my mental instability would be accepted without question. Lauren tried once more. I heard her arguing with my parents on the front porch, threatening to call the police. My mother's response was practiced and perfect. "We appreciate your concern for our daughter," she said with convincing sincerity. "But Amber has serious psychological issues that require specialized care. The police are well aware of her condition. In fact, Officer Reynolds has been wonderfully supportive of our situation. Would you like his number?" It was a bluff, but an effective one. Lauren retreated, but I could see from my window that she watched our house more intently. Her curtains were often parted, her presence visible at her windows at odd hours. My health began to deteriorate from stress, insufficient nutrition, and the side effects of unnecessary medication. I lost weight. My hair started falling out. Sleep was elusive, broken by nightmares when it came at all. Yet, despite my weakened state, my resolve strengthened. I understood with perfect clarity that I needed to escape, or I would die in that house, either from their direct actions or from the slow poison of captivity. I had one remaining lifeline, a prepaid phone I'd purchased during a rare, supervised shopping trip months earlier, hidden inside a heating vent. The battery was low, I had no charger, but I preserved it for an emergency. I didn't know then how soon that emergency would come, or that it would arrive in the form of flames and smoke that would nearly claim my life. The night that changed everything began ordinarily enough. My parents conducted their usual evening routine, checking locks, administering my medication, securing me in my room for the night. I pretended to swallow the pills, but tucked them under my tongue, spitting them into a tissue once alone, a small act of defiance that kept my mind clearer than they intended. I fell into a restless sleep around 11, only to wake suddenly at 2 in the morning to an unusual sound from downstairs. At first, I thought it might be my father doing one of his middle-of-the-night security checks. But this sound was different, a crackling, followed by a muffled pop. I sat up in bed, straining to identify it. Then I smelled it, smoke. Faint at first, then increasingly acrid. My first reaction was oddly calm. Fire drills were ingrained from school. Get low, find an exit, call for help. I slid out of bed and crawled to my bedroom door, already feeling the temperature rising. When I touched the doorknob, it was warm, but not hot. I turned it, expecting to enter the hallway and find my parents. But the knob turned, and the door wouldn't open. I pushed harder, then realized with a surge of terror that it was locked from the outside. Not just the regular lock, but something more. I could feel resistance, as though something heavy had been braced against it. Mom! Dad! I called out, my voice higher than normal. There's a fire! I can't get out! No response. I pressed my ear to the door and heard movement downstairs, indistinct voices. I pounded on the door, shouting louder. Help! The house is on fire! I'm locked in. The smoke was thickening now, seeping under my door in ominous tendrils. I grabbed a towel, stuffed it into the gap, but it was only temporary relief. My eyes began to sting, my throat tightening. I moved to the window, the most logical escape route. My room was on the second floor, but the garage roof extended beneath, offering a possible path to safety. I grasped the window sash and pulled upward, already anticipating the resistance of the old locks. But this was different. The window didn't budge at all. In the dim light from my bedside lamp, I could see why. Fresh nails had been hammered through the frame at intervals of just a few inches, securing it completely. Some sort of industrial sealant had been applied around the edges. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my desk chair and slammed it against the window, but the reinforced glass merely shuddered. Again, I struck. Tiny cracks appeared, but the window held firm. The nails remained embedded in the wood, unmoved by my desperate efforts. The smoke was getting thicker. I could hear the fire now, a hungry roar from downstairs. The floor beneath my feet was growing hot. I dropped to my hands and knees, remembering that air would be clearer near the floor. And then I heard it, car doors slamming outside. I crawled back to the window and peered out. In the driveway, illuminated by security lights, I saw my parents getting into our family sedan. They were leaving. They were leaving me in a burning house. In that moment, the truth I had been trying not to acknowledge for years crystallized with perfect clarity. This was not an accident. This was not neglect. This was intentional. The sealed windows, the locked door, their hasty departure. They wanted me to die in this fire. I began screaming. Raw sounds of terror and betrayal tore at my smoke-irritated throat. I pounded the window, threw myself against the door, searched frantically for anything that might break through my wooden prison. Through my panic, I remembered the phone. My emergency lifeline. I scrambled across the room, prying open the metal grate with fingers already blistering from the rising heat. The small phone was there, miraculously still showing a partial charge. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911, coughing violently as smoke filled my lungs. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was so calm, so utterly normal, in contrast to my hellish surroundings. Fire! I gasped. I'm trapped. 622 Maple Street, second floor bedroom. I cannot get out. Is there a fire in your home? The dispatcher asked. Are there other people in the house? Yes, fire. I confirmed, my voice breaking. No people. My parents left. They locked me in. The windows are nailed shut. I can't get out. There was a brief pause, as though the dispatcher was processing this impossible information. Did you say the windows are nailed shut? Yes. I screamed, abandoning all composure. They nailed my windows. I cannot get out. They want me to die. I heard sirens in the distance as the dispatcher assured me help was coming. The smoke was so thick now I could barely see across my room. The heat was intense, pressing against my skin like a physical weight. I crawled to the farthest corner from the door, pressing a wet cloth I'd grabbed from my bathroom against my mouth and nose. Through the window, I saw emergency lights approaching. I heard someone shouting outside, indistinct words. A new sound caught my attention, Lauren's voice, from next door, screaming my name. Amber! Oh my God! Amber! I crawled back to the window, fighting against the thickening smoke, and pounded on the glass. Through watery eyes, I could see Lauren in her yard, pointing frantically toward my window as firefighters arrived. The next few minutes blurred in my oxygen-deprived mind. There was the sound of breaking glass, the rush of fresher air. Figures in protective gear appeared at my window, expressions of shock visible even through their masks as they registered the nails securing my window shut. Strong arms lifted me. Someone was saying something about a ladder. I was being carried. The cool night air hit my smoke-ravaged lungs, causing a coughing fit so violent I thought my ribs would crack. I remember fragments of the next hour, oxygen being placed over my face, the burn of N4 being inserted. Lauren's tear-streaked face appearing briefly above me, her hands squeezing mine. I remember trying to speak, to explain, but lacking the strength to form coherent sentences. Most vividly, I remember seeing my parents returning to the scene, their performance beginning immediately. My mother's theatrical wail. My father's stunned expression. Both rushing toward the ambulance with perfectly practiced concern. Our daughter, my mother cried to anyone who would listen. Is she all right? We just went for help. The smoke alarms malfunctioned. We tried to save her. Through my oxygen mask, I whispered the truth to the paramedic beside me. They locked me in. They nailed the window shut. They left me to die. His expression shifted, skepticism giving way to something darker as he looked from me to my hysterical parents, being held back by police officers. He leaned closer. We found the nails, he said quietly. Fresh hammer marks. We saw the lock on your door. No one is going to hurt you anymore. As consciousness faded, I heard a police officer speaking to my parents, his voice hard and suspicious. We need to ask you some questions about those windows, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson. And about this recording from the 911 call. My mother's voice rose in practiced indignation. Our daughter is mentally disturbed. She has delusions. We would never harm her. But for the first time in my life, no one was believing her performance. The last thing I remember before darkness claimed me was the unfamiliar but beautiful sound of handcuffs clicking around my mother's wrists. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. My throat raw from smoke inhalation, my lungs damaged but healing. The first face I saw was not my mother's or father's, but Lauren's, sitting beside my bed, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd barely left my side. "They're in custody," were her first words to me, answering the question I hadn't yet found the strength to ask. "Both of them. They're not getting anywhere near you ever again." A police detective named Jason Reynolds came to see me that afternoon, his manner gentle but direct. He sat beside my bed, notepad ready, but initially unused as he simply asked how I was feeling. "I need to ask you some questions, Amber," he finally said. "But first, I want you to know that we found the hammer marks on your window frames. Fresh marks. We found the sealant. We found the lock on your bedroom door, and the furniture that had been pushed against it. The evidence supports your account." I closed my eyes briefly, a strange mixture of relief and pain washing over me. For so long, I had been told that my perceptions were wrong, that my memories were unreliable, that my fears were delusions. Having external validation of the reality I had experienced was both vindicating and devastating. Detective Reynolds was patient as I shared my story, beginning with my earliest memories of control and isolation, working through the escalating restrictions of my teenage years, and finally describing the horrifying realization that my parents had left me to die in a fire they likely started themselves. "We can't prove yet that they set the fire deliberately," he told me. "The fire investigator says it started in the kitchen, possibly electrical, but we can prove they knew about it, left without attempting to rescue you, and had taken deliberate steps to prevent your escape." "They've been telling people I'm mentally ill for years," I said, my voice still raspy. "That I have delusions, that I'm unstable and need their protection. Will anyone believe me?" Detective Reynolds' expression hardened slightly. "The 911 recording is compelling evidence, Amber. Your voice, your terror, your clear statement that they had nailed your windows shut, all captured in real time during the emergency. It's difficult to dismiss that as delusion." He hesitated before continuing. "We executed a search warrant on your parents' home, or what remains of it after the fire. We found medication bottles prescribed to you by a doctor who, when interviewed, had no record of you as a patient. We found journals belonging to your mother that," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "strongly suggest a psychological condition that experts will need to evaluate." As my physical condition improved, the full scope of the investigation was revealed. My mother's journals, partially recovered from a fireproof safe, contained years of detailed documentation of her treatment of my supposed mental illness, a condition that existed only in her mind. Psychologists suggested she suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention and sympathy. More chilling were the entries from recent months where she wrote explicitly about her fear of losing control over me, of my potential escape into the world, and her determination to maintain a grip on my life, whatever the cost. "Your father appears to have been more of an enabler than an instigator," Detective Reynolds explained. "He admitted knowing what your mother was doing was wrong, but claims he was afraid to contradict her. He's been cooperating, providing details about the progression of your confinement." Lauren became a key witness, describing her observations, the notes I'd passed, and her unsuccessful attempts to get authorities to investigate before the fire. She brought forward our written communications. "I should have done more," she told me tearfully. "I knew something was terribly wrong, but I didn't know how to help without making things worse." "You did help," I assured her. "You were the only one who saw through their facade. You were the only one who believed me." Other neighbors came forward as the case gained attention, sharing observations they had dismissed or rationalized. My former teachers were interviewed, many expressing shock and guilt at having accepted my parents' explanations for my increasingly withdrawn behavior. Dr. Matthews, my online psychology professor, provided records of our communications and her own documented concerns. As physical evidence mounted and witness statements gathered, the prosecution's case against my parents strengthened. The district attorney explained they would be charged with attempted murder, false imprisonment, child abuse, and numerous other crimes. "Your mother's journals are particularly damning," she told me. "They show premeditation and a disturbing lack of remorse. In one entry from just weeks before the fire, she wrote about how she would rather see you dead than independent of her control." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. I had understood, on some level, that my mother's love was twisted, possessive. But to have confirmation that she had actually contemplated my death was still shocking. As my physical recovery progressed, I began working with a trauma specialist, Dr. Eleanor Simmons. She helped me process not only the acute trauma of the fire but the lifelong psychological abuse. For the first time, I could speak freely about my experiences without fear of being labeled delusional or having my reality denied. "What you are describing is gaslighting in its most extreme form," Dr. Simmons explained. "They systematically undermined your trust in your own perceptions, isolated you from anyone who might validate your reality, and created an alternative narrative about your mental state that served their purposes." One of the most difficult aspects of recovery was accepting that the parents I had desperately tried to please, whose love I had craved even amid their abuse, had been willing to let me die rather than lose control over me. Dr. Simmons helped me understand that their behavior reflected their own severe psychological disturbances, not any failure or deficiency on my part. "You survived by maintaining an inner core of truth," she told me. "Despite years of having your reality denied, you held on to what you knew to be true. That resilience saved your life." 6 weeks after the fire, strong enough to leave the hospital, but with nowhere to go, I moved temporarily into Lauren's spare bedroom. The community that had once believed my parents' narrative now rallied around me. A local law firm took my case pro bono. As the preliminary hearing approached, I steeled myself to face my parents in court. The evidence was substantial, but I knew their ability to present a convincing facade of loving concern. For 29 years, they had fooled everyone. Part of me still feared they might do so again. "Remember," Detective Reynolds told me the day before the hearing, "we have the 911 recording. We have the physical evidence. We have your mother's own writings. And most importantly, we have you, alive and able to tell the truth." The truth that had been denied for so long was finally going to be heard. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from movies. Polished wood, fluorescent lighting, the slight echo of footsteps. I sat beside the prosecutor, Julia Winters, who had spent hours preparing me. Still, nothing could have fully readied me for the sight of my parents entering in handcuffs, looking smaller and older than in my memory. My mother's eyes found mine immediately, her expression a practiced blend of concern and betrayal that I had seen countless times. My father looked at the floor, shoulders hunched, the embodiment of defeat. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old guilt they had so carefully cultivated in me. Then I remembered the nails in my window frames, the smoke filling my lungs, their car driving away as flames consumed our house with me trapped inside. The preliminary hearing expanded into a full trial that lasted 3 weeks. Evidence mounted day by day. The 911 recording played for the jury, their faces reflecting horror as they heard my desperate screams. Forensic analysis of the window frames showed fresh nails and sealant, applied just days before the fire. Medical experts testified about the unnecessary medications I'd been given. Psychologists explained the patterns of abuse and control evident in my parents' behavior. My mother maintained her performance throughout, insisting she had only ever tried to protect her mentally disturbed daughter. She cried on cue, spoke with perfect maternal concern, and expressed confusion about why I would fabricate such terrible accusations against parents who loved me so devotedly. Amber has always had a vivid imagination, she testified, dabbing at non-existent tears. As a child, she would tell stories that simply weren't true. As she grew older, the stories became darker, more paranoid. We consulted doctors, tried medication, did everything possible to help her. My father's defense took a different approach. His attorney portrayed him as another victim of my mother's psychological manipulation, a weak man who failed to protect his daughter, but who never actively participated in my imprisonment. He admitted to installing the locks and nailing the windows, but claimed he did so under duress, believing my mother's assertions that I was a danger to myself. I made terrible mistakes, he testified, actually meeting my eyes briefly. I failed Amber. I should have protected her from Susan's obsession. I will regret that failure every day for the rest of my life. The most difficult day of the trial came when I took the stand. Facing my parents while recounting the years of abuse required every ounce of strength I possessed. My voice shook at times, but I forced myself to look directly at them as I spoke my truth. They told me from childhood that I was mentally unstable, that I needed their protection from myself and from the world, I testified, my voice stronger than I expected. But I was never ill until they began medicating me with drugs I didn't need. I was never in danger until they created the danger. They did not protect me. They imprisoned me. My mother's attorney cross-examined me aggressively, trying to create doubt about my recollections, suggesting that trauma and smoke inhalation had affected my memory of the fire. He implied that my online psychology classes had given me terminology to fabricate a narrative of abuse. Is it possible, he asked with practiced skepticism, that your parents really did try to save you that night, but your oxygen-deprived brain misinterpreted their actions? I looked directly at the jury as I answered. I saw them get into their car and drive away while smoke filled my lungs and flames approached my locked bedroom. My windows were nailed shut. My door was barricaded from the outside. Those are not actions of people trying to save someone. Those are actions of people ensuring someone cannot escape. The turning point came when the prosecution played the full 911 recording for the courtroom. My voice, thin with terror and choked by smoke, echoed through the silent room. They nailed my windows. I cannot get out. They want me to die. The dispatcher's calm questions, my increasingly desperate responses, the sound of my coughing and struggling to breathe, all captured in real time, had an undeniable impact. I watched jurors wince, one woman covered her mouth in horror. Even my father closed his eyes, unable to maintain his composure. In the silence that followed, my mother did something unexpected. She began to laugh, a soft, unsettling sound that gradually increased in volume until the judge had to call for order. When she spoke, her carefully maintained facade had cracked, revealing something cold and alien beneath. She was always going to leave me, my mother said, no longer performing for the jury, but speaking directly to me. Just like everyone else. I gave her everything. I protected her from the filth of the world, and she wanted to abandon me for a life of independence. She spat the last word like a curse. No one who really loves you gives you independence, Amber. They keep you close. They keep you safe. They keep you. The courtroom fell silent at this confession. My mother seemed to realize her error quickly, attempting to resume her previous demeanor, but it was too late. The jury had glimpsed the truth behind her performance. My father, perhaps sensing the shift, made a decision that surprised everyone. He asked to change his plea to guilty and offered a full confession. He described years of knowing what was happening was wrong, but being too afraid of my mother to intervene. He detailed how they had planned to institutionalize me permanently before I could establish an independent adult life. And he confirmed that on the night of the fire, they had indeed left me to die, driving away with full knowledge that I was trapped inside. Susan said it would be better this way, he testified, his voice barely audible. That Amber would never be happy in the world, that the world would hurt her, that a quick death was preferable to a lifetime of suffering, and I was too much of a coward to stop her. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both my parents. My mother received a sentence of 40 years without possibility of parole. My father, given his cooperation and guilty plea, received 25 years with possibility of parole after 15. Before they were led away, the judge allowed me to make a statement. I stood, my legs shaking slightly, and faced the people who had given me life and then tried to take it away. I spent 29 years believing I was broken, I said, my voice stronger than I expected, believing I needed your protection from myself and from the world. Today, I stand before you, whole and free. I am not speaking to offer forgiveness. I am speaking to declare my independence from your control, from your lies, from your twisted version of love. This is the last time I will ever address you, and the first day of a life that belongs entirely to me. As they were led away, my mother called out one last time, "You will fail without us, Amber. You need us." But her voice held no power over me anymore. The truth had been spoken, heard, and affirmed. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and media, I felt something unfamiliar spreading through me. It took a moment to recognize it: freedom. Not just physical freedom, but the liberation of having my reality acknowledged and validated after a lifetime of denial. The weight of secrecy and shame had lifted, replaced by the sometimes terrifying, but always precious gift of self-determination. "What will you do now?" a reporter asked as I prepared to leave. I smiled, the expression still feeling somewhat foreign on my face. "I am going to live," I said simply. "For the first time in my life, I am going to truly live." The journey from surviving to thriving did not follow a straight line. There were days when freedom felt overwhelming, when I questioned my ability to navigate a world I had been systematically taught to fear. There were nights when I woke in panic, convinced I was still trapped in that burning room. But with each passing month, those moments became less frequent, less intense. Dr. Simmons continued to work with me, helping me process not only the acute trauma of the fire, but the complex psychological impact of lifelong abuse. "Recovery is not about forgetting what happened," she explained. "It is about integrating those experiences into your understanding of yourself without allowing them to define your future." Lauren remained a steadfast presence in my life, transitioning from rescuer to roommate to genuine friend. She never pushed me to discuss my experiences, but listened when I needed to talk. She celebrated small victories with me: my first solo trip to the grocery store, my first time driving a car, my decision to finish my degree in psychology. "I thought I was brave until I met you," she told me once. "You redefined courage for me every day." 6 months after the trial, I moved into my own apartment. A small but sun-filled space that I decorated exactly as I wished. The first night alone was terrifying, but I reminded myself that fear was a normal response to new experiences, not evidence that I was incapable of independence, as my parents had claimed. I placed no locks on my bedroom door. Every window could be opened fully. These were not casual choices, but deliberate reclamations of freedom. Each morning, I opened all the windows for at least a few minutes, regardless of weather, just because I could. The fresh air, even when cold or damp, tasted like liberty. The media attention following the trial brought unexpected connections. Other survivors of family abuse reached out to share their stories in solidarity. Organizations working with domestic violence victims invited me to speak about psychological abuse and coercive control. Gradually, I found purpose in helping others recognize and escape situations similar to what I had experienced. 1 year after the fire, I established a small foundation focusing on helping young adults transitioning out of abusive family situations. We provided practical support, legal resources, and most importantly, community. The isolation that abusers create as their first line of control could be broken through connection with others who understood without explanation. You turned your pain into purpose, Dr. Matthews told me when I invited her to speak at our foundation's first formal event. That is the most powerful form of healing. Not everyone understood my story. Some people still questioned how parents could behave so monstrously, suggesting there must be another explanation. Others implied I should find forgiveness for my own sake, not understanding that for me, freedom from my parents included freedom from any obligation to reconcile with them. I learned to trust my instincts about whom to let into my life. Years of gaslighting had damaged my ability to distinguish between genuine concern and controlling behavior. But with practice and support, my internal warning system grew stronger. I became attuned to red flags, people who pushed boundaries, who questioned my perceptions, who sought to isolate me from others. The most profound lesson I learned was about the nature of love. Real love expands rather than contracts. It creates space for growth rather than confinement. It trusts rather than suspects. It releases rather than restrains. 3 years after the fire, I completed my master's degree in counseling psychology, specializing in trauma recovery. My thesis on psychological abuse within families drew on both personal experience and extensive research. The day I received my diploma, Lauren and a group of friends surprised me with a celebration that left me speechless with gratitude. From surviving to thriving to helping others do the same, Lauren toasted. You are a walking miracle, Ember. But I didn't see myself as miraculous, merely fortunate. Fortunate that Lauren had heard my screams that night. Fortunate that the 911 operator had recorded my desperate words. Fortunate that investigators had found those fresh hammer marks on my window frames. So many abuse victims never get their moment of validation, their chance at justice, their opportunity for a new beginning. Today, my life bears no resemblance to the prison of my first 29 years. I work with trauma survivors, sharing tools for recovery. I travel, experiencing the world my parents insisted was too dangerous for me to enter. I form relationships based on mutual respect rather than control disguised as protection. The nightmares haven't completely disappeared, but they have lost their power to derail my days. The psychological wounds have formed scars that occasionally ache, but no longer bleed. I carry my history not as a burden, but as hard-won wisdom about human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. Perhaps the most powerful realization has been that freedom is not just the absence of physical restraint, but the presence of self-determination. True safety comes not from walls and locks, but from the knowledge that you can trust yourself to navigate whatever challenges arise. Every window in my current home opens fully, without locks or barriers of any kind. That simple fact represents the safety I have created for myself, the safety that comes from within, rather than being imposed from without. On warm summer evenings, I sometimes sit by my open window, feeling the breeze on my face, and acknowledge how far I have traveled from that smoke-filled room with its nailed-shut windows and sealed-off future. If you are watching this and recognize your own life in any part of my story, please know that you are not alone. Trust your perceptions. Document what is happening. Reach out for help, even if previous attempts have failed. Freedom is possible. Healing is possible. A life reclaimed is possible. Thank you for listening to my story. Take care. Good luck.